So let me open. It gives me pleasure to do so today. So I am opening with a hackneyed phrase. My apologies to everybody here. But Albert Weideman needs no introduction. Being a well-known and a highly respected professor of applied linguistics and research fellow in the Department of English at the UFS, and he has many, 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 many talents. I'd have to spend a whole hour or more telling you about Albert's skills. I remember quite a number of years ago now, and as a very young applied linguist, I recall the light bulb going on in my own head when Albert clarified the distinction between linguistics and applied linguistics, the latter being, and I quote from Albert's webpage, a field that responds to human suffering by offering design solutions to vexing and apparently intractable language problems, in that it is operating in its own right, in service of others and responsibly, close quote. And this definition is, of course, perfectly aligned with Albert's presentation today, which focuses on how language assessment literacy has contributed to professionalizing and advancing the field of applied linguistics. It's always fascinating, by the way, and beyond useful to have the opportunity to listen to a scholar who can provide us with a critical historical overview of a subfield such as this one. So Albert, we look very much forward to your topic today. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you also to Hunter for organizing this and for advertising it so well. I'm always overawed by the kind of the prominence that this finds on social media, thanks to Hunter. I also would like to say it's a real privilege for me to be here with you again. I think it's been a good 10 years since I've last spoken to this particular audience. So it's a privilege for me, and I really appreciate it very much. So thanks for the invitation. Thanks also to Iri Manassi, who was head of the department and handled things administratively for me, handled things perfectly. Thanks very much for that. And congratulations from my side to Susan Brokenshaw, who's now been on the job for several months already. But I am so glad, Susan, that at long last the ambitions that others have had for you have come to fruition. So I wish you well in your current role. I'm going to do three things today. So before I start to share the screen, let me just say what this will be about. The three things that I'm going to do is we're going to talk generally about what is an advance, what constitutes progress, if you wish. What constitutes an opening up, a disclosure of human activity? How can we gauge whether something that is developing is indeed a development that will benefit everybody? Secondly, I'm going to talk about language assessment literacy. So I would need in this audience, I think, also just to say something about language assessment, which is language testing. And let me say that right now. Language testing is, as we shall see in the presentation that I'm going to make, one of three subfields of applied linguistics. So the tests of language ability that we design are designed to be measurements of language ability usually in a particular context. So that is what language assessment is. And you can guess what language assessment literacy is, but we'll come to that. The third thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make certain applications to the South African context that is affected by, or where it is affected by, issues of language assessment, of the assessment of language ability. So let me see now if I can share, and if I can't, Hunter, then it says I can. So I'm going to first share the screen. I think, oopsie. Yes. Yes. No. And then the PowerPoint, you should be able to see that.
Yes, we can see it. We can see that
clearly. Yeah,
okay,
it's clear.
So there is the title. I'm going to speak about what an advance means, what it is to be historically significant, and obviously I'm going to speak about language assessment and what language assessment literacy is. So let me begin. Oh my goodness. This thing. Ah, let me begin by saying I'm going to look back on many decades. So in these decades, you would have expected certain developments that may constitute advances or progress, or what I prefer to call a disclosure of a human activity. And these ones that do exhibit this disclosure, this bit of progress, this advance, will be events and developments that have historical significance. So those two are the key terms. And I'm basing this on a book that was published in 2022 by Ahmed Skuurman, which is titled Transformation of the Technological Society. But what it gives is a theory of technology in times of transformation, technology in times of transition, where you have disruptions that may influence not only language assessment, but technology as a whole. So let me start with the issue of what historical significance is. Historical significance is usually something that derives from a potentially influential issue or development or event or state, normally a conflict. And that normally becomes significant when it is expressed. Now, you can see one kind of expression on the screen, a monument. We often record in the form of monuments the significance of historical events. And all of you will recognize, I hope, this monument because it stands in Bloemfontein. So when history becomes signified, when it gets expressed, when it gets recorded in the form of historiography, in the form of documents documenting history, etc., that means that we are recording things of historical significance. That's the first step, really, if you want to ask what is historically significant. Has it been expressed? Has it been recorded? Has it been signaled? And in language assessment, then, we will ask, are there things that signal an advance in language test design? Are there things that we can say, okay, this is moving us forward? So I'm basing this particular lecture on two recent publications on languages that touch upon language assessment literacy that I've recently published. The one is in a book that I co-edited with Rafael Salaberry of Rice University in Houston, and also Weili Su, called Ethics and Context in Second Language Testing, Rethinking Validity in Theory and Practice. That's a Rutledge book that I think deserves attention, especially if you're heading towards an MA and TESOL that may be of interest there. And the particular chapter that I'm referring to, I've contributed 3, but the one that I'm referring to is the Yardsticks for the Future. It is in our library, incidentally, or in an ebook form. Then the second one is the one that actually is the meat of this talk. It's a contribution I made to a series published by Cambridge University Press called Studies in Language Testing, and they're already at number 55. These studies have been pretty influential, and here I tease apart the kinds of things that I'm going to discuss with you today. So let's come to the discussion of the meat of today, what language assessment literacy is. Let me just say that it is a theme, it is a topic that is almost unavoidable when you go to an international conference. So there's an international conference in language testing run by the International Language Testing Association every year, and that is called Language Testing Research Colloquium, or LTRC. Somehow, however, if you go to an overseas conference, 40% of the papers will be on language assessment literacy. Somehow, however, in South Africa, there's only one instance that I know of, and that is a discussion of language assessment literacy at a conference, in a conference paper. The idea of being literate, of course, relates to another historical trend that is interesting. We speak about academic literacy or financial literacy or technological literacy or media literacy, etc. And saying we should be language assessment literate, of course, ties in with that whole trend that has touched all of our lives somewhere along the line. If you want to see what the history of language assessment literacy of this concept is, you can read the reviews by, let me just move this a little bit. I seem to be moving you now, Susan. Taylor's book, Taylor's book of the 2013 was the first survey. Then Inbound Lowry came in 2017 with an updated one. I'll say something about those in a second. Oh dear, I've again lost. There we go. Okay, so let's define it. Obviously, if you are literate in language assessment, if you are able to test language ability, you have a knowledge and ability of language assessment. That is normally broken up into three parts. The conceptual knowledge that you have, in other words, do you know how to conceptualize this thing that we call language assessment? The second part is, do you have knowledge of the procedures of the kinds of events where language ability gets tested? And nowadays, a third component is added, a policy and an ethical dimension. Actually, all those three then together come to constitute language assessment literacy. You also need to consider what language assessment policies are and whether they are ethical. So let me give you an example just to make it a little more concrete, because we've been speaking in conceptual terms now. If you want to determine the language assessment literacy of secondary school teachers in South Africa, for example, you would give them a questionnaire with questions like those that you see, that I hope that you are seeing on the screen at the moment. And as you can see, these are paired questions, as is often done in questionnaires. The one contradicts the other. So you also test doing that. You're scrambling them, of course. You're not putting them directly after one another. So you want to have a consistent answer, and you check for consistency and for control by pairing them off like this. Look at number 5, for example. I consider the official prescriptions, that's in caps, the curriculum and assessment policy statement, on how to assess language ability as useful. Or the assessment guidelines that are part of the official policy are not very helpful. Now, those two contradict each other. Or 7, I follow the subject assessment guidelines, or so-called SAGs, for assessing language, and I follow them faithfully. Or I often disregard the assessment policies prescribed for assessing language. So if you give teachers, secondary school teachers, a questionnaire like this, you will be able to determine how assessment literate are they. These are, of course, not the only questions. In the questionnaire that I took this from, there are more than 50 questions, 54 at the moment, in fact, and there could potentially be more. I'll say something about that at the end. So when this topic arose of language assessment literacy, initially the concerns were with the assessment literacy of language teachers. So people initially said we should worry about whether language teachers can indeed assess language ability. That, however, eventually became a concern not only with teachers, but also with officials who need to interpret language test results. Now, in our own country, you're familiar with tests of academic literacy, such as the National Benchmark Test in Academic and Quantitative Literacy, or the Test of Academic Literacy for Postgraduate Students that ISELDA makes available. But how do officials interpret these results? Do we have, as language test designers and developers, control over how they do that? So we're interested also nowadays in what policymakers do with the kinds of language measurements or measurements of language ability that we design. And having said that, then the second question is, does this development in being interested in the language assessment literacy of language teachers and the language assessment literacy of officials, does that concern that we have as language test developers constitute advances or not? In order to answer that particular question, we need theory. We need theory that assumes, in the first instance, that language assessment is a subfield of applied linguistics. And I argue that it is a subfield of applied linguistics because it shares in the basic concepts, the fundamental or elementary concepts, also sometimes called primitives, of other applied linguistic subfields. So if you go not to language assessment, but if you go to language policy development and language course design, which are the other two huge subfields, there are more, but these are the three main ones. If you go to not only to language assessment, but also look at policy development and language course design, you will find that all of them have something in common, and that is that design is key. They are drawn up, they are planned, they are tailored for doing what they should do, namely making a policy or setting out a policy, being a course that derives from a curriculum, or being language assessment. So that's the starting point of the theory, is language assessment is a subfield of applied linguistics. And it's one of three subfields. Let me just do that again. So if you look at factual applied linguistic artifacts, you will see that where they meet, where the rubber meets the tar, is at the factual level. Yeah, those are the concrete designs, things like language courses, language tests, and language management plans. They're the concrete things that go into the applied linguistic factual instances or artifacts that affect our lives. But they are conditioned, they have a normative side to them. So you won't get a language course without a proper curriculum. The curriculum sets the norms for the course. The test construct and the test specifications set out the requirements, the conditions to which the test or the battery of assessments must adhere. So you get norms and you get facts. These two sides, a normative side and a factual side, are always present in these particular designs. So how to demonstrate an advance in design? I think at this point, I need to make it as clear as possible by saying, let's ask in the form of questions whether a language assessment fulfills this particular condition or requirement. And I'll tell you in 2 seconds where the 6 yardsticks derive from, but let me first give you the questions. The first one is the design ethical? Does it seek fairness? So if we have a measurement of language ability, is it going to measure fairly? The second is it going to do so efficiently? The third is the information about what is going to be tested, is that transparent? Is it accessible? Is it available to everybody? And fourthly, is the level of the test appropriate? Is there a fit between the ability of the population writing the test and the test, what the test is testing? The fifth question is the test aligned with other intervention designs? I mean, is it in harmony with language courses that must follow the measurement, or is the policy in line with the other two? And the sixth question is, does the test seek to advance justice? Does it correct when corrections are called for? Is there the possibility of correcting it, of rectifying it? And then it seeks, in my humble opinion, then it seeks justice. So where do these 6 yardsticks come from? And here I must refer to the story of the gorillas in our midst. Can I ask, is anybody familiar with the experiments of the gorillas in our midst? Tinus, have you heard of them?
Oh, I think I've heard of them. I think you might have told me directly about them.
Yeah, that could very well be. Okay, so, and the others, has anybody else heard of the gorillas in our midst experiments? Well, these experiments simply say that we don't sometimes deal with things that we observe, and they tell tales of abstraction. The original work was done by Saunders and Chabris in the reference that I show you at the bottom there. But what it basically is that they said to people watching a video clip, watch this video, you will see a team with white T-shirts and team with black T-shirts. They will be passing a ball to other members of their team and sometimes to the other teams. We want you to count the number of times that they pass the ball, and we want you to count the number of times that they let the ball drop and pick it up again. So you must keep record of that. So in the middle of this clip then, while people were watching and counting the balls being passed around, it was next to an elevator. So they had a person in a gorilla suit come out of the elevator, walk amidst them, and disappear again into the other elevator. Afterwards, they asked the people who were watching the video, what did they see? And in all of these experiments, I mean, there's a woman walking with an umbrella, there's a gorilla thumping its chest, etc. All kinds of variations of this. In all of the experiments, never more than 50% notice the gorilla walking. Sometimes as low as 10% noticed the gorilla walking. The others were so focused on what they were counting that they didn't see it. So that gorilla over there to them simply disappeared. It wasn't there. So that is a tale of abstraction. And that is the route that science always follows. And I'm going to explain that to you as best I can. When we abstract, we pull something out. We lift it out so that we can examine it a little more closely. And we abstract away from, we pull things out of concrete things like language. And we can say, what can we pull out of language that we can scrutinize more closely? Or we can abstract from real events. In other words, we can look at human interaction through language and say, what can be abstracted here? Say, for example, in psychotherapist client talk. And then we can also abstract away from problems or conditions. So sometimes within an institution, there may be language conflict. And we can look at that condition and we can abstract, we can pull things out of it to see what sense we can make of it. Or we can abstract away from relations that are either mediated or bedeviled by language. What can we pull out of that in order to make better sense of it? In applied linguistics, oh my goodness, I'm again having to remove Tinus now. In applied linguistics, the characteristic focus of what we lift out, what we abstract, is not an object, right? Like one of those three artifacts that I showed you. Neither is it a state, nor is it an event. It is a modality. So in order to make sense of applied linguistics, oh dear, we need to abstract. We need to lift out the function of design. We need to pull out that function that is characterized by shaping, by planning, by arranging, by influencing, by facilitating, and so on. There are lots of synonyms for this, but I give approximate definitions of what I mean by design by saying it is about planning, it's about shaping, it's about forming, arranging, etc. Now that focus that we have, gorilla-like on design, entails that we lift out what I call the technical mode of our experience. Perhaps I must just say something there about why I'm saying we're not abstracting events or relations, we're abstracting away from them. We are accepting when we abstract in the way that I am proposing here, we are accepting that we abstract from what I would call the modal structure of our experience. In other words, in addition to concrete things like events and conflicts and procedures, etc., in addition to what we can see, whether they are gorillas or not, there is a mode of experience, a higher level of abstraction that we can obtain when we lift modalities or modes of explanations out of our experience. And in that sense, then, if we abstract away from the modal structure, from the modal horizon of our experience, do we abstract the technical? And if we look at technical artifacts like language courses, language tests, language policies, technical imagination always shows the way. But the design always needs theoretical support. So you've got this direction setting function of design that I call the technical, right? So the design function is technical. And there's the analytical founding function of the design. But in addition to those two, there are lots of other modes of explanation or modes of being. So I've always likened this to the way that you dissect a leaf, right? So if you take a leaf and you cut through it like that, and you hold it horizontally, you will see certain nodes. However, if you hold the leaf upright, like the one on the left there, you will see that there are all kinds of connections. If you look at it vertically, there are all kinds of connections among the various nodes. It's the same with the modal structure of our experience. The technical mode is but one of many. It's the qualifying, the direction giving function of design, but it connects with a number of other functions. Is somebody calling or I suppose it's somebody calling me on WhatsApp or somebody. I'd better put my phone off. Otherwise, it will come through. Sorry about this. That's better. Okay, so that qualifying technical function of design, if you think of the leaf now, connects with all other dimensions of our experience in that modal horizon. So it connects with things like the kinematic modality, for example. That's the modality that is characterized by regular motion. So there's some connection between the technical and the kinematic. And I won't come to that today, but I'm just showing you what other possible experiential aspects may potentially connect to the technical. There's the physical, the sphere of energy. There's the analytical or theoretical. There's the lingual that we use to express things. There's the social, interactive mode. There's the economic. There's the ethical. There's the numerical, the spatial, the organic, the sensitive, the aesthetic, the juridical, and a function that I call the certitudinal. So many functions may potentially connect with the technical, and those yardsticks, those 6 questions that I referred to earlier, all derive from interconnections of the technical dimension of design with others. If you want to know what is an advance, we need to look at the ones on the right. So the others are building blocks. We need to look at the lodestars on the right. The way that the technical connects with the lingual, for example, is technical meaningfulness or interpretability. The way that it connects with the social, technical appropriateness, etc. But let me give you some more concrete examples. Let's start with the most prominent, what I think, disclosure of what is the most prominent disclosure of design. Okay, let me just say that those that lie this side of the technical, in other words, towards the right, those are the potential disclosures of the technical that opens up the technical so that we can appreciate its true meaning. And we can appreciate the meaning of the technical if we ask, does the test measure fairly? Is the test compassionate in the way that it measures? Does it measure with care? And has it been construed with diligence? Has the design been done so that fairness may be the outcome? So was there concern, with the care and concern of the test takers? Was the test beneficial to them? Is another way of putting the same question. Now, that concern with the impact of tests, it's been called consequential validity in the literature. That whole concern comes from 1988, 1989, when Messick first wrote about this. That sensitized test providers to take care to make a test fair. And specifically, what is interesting people nowadays is the impact that high-stakes tests have on access to resources. Now, in the Netherlands and in Belgium, for example, you need to pass a language test in order to become a citizen. You cannot be a citizen in the Netherlands if you do not pass a certain level of Dutch. So it's a high-stakes test for you. Everything, your livelihood depends on it. The same with higher education. If you want access to higher education, specifically in some professional courses in South Africa, you need to do what is called the national benchmark test, and you need to do well on that. So what is the impact on that, and is it fair? Those are the questions that concern language test developers and should concern the policymakers as well. That doesn't, but it should. So how fairly do these tests treat those measures? Let's take as an example of how you can calculate this, because you can. 5,400 people wrote the test at a large residential university. The test was called TOEL, Test of Academic Literacy Levels, in 2011. Of those 3,500, you could calculate on the basis of the reliability of the test that you can measure through a statistic called alpha, or greatest lower bound, and that you can measure in the case of the same test, that's the RXX case, or a similar test, that's the RXT case. So you can look at what the worst case would have been for those 5,400 is that 204 of them may have been misclassified. So you can calculate on the basis of the measurement error in the test how many may have been misclassified. here's a trick question there. How many do you think, if you want to measure fairly, should be given a second chance? Unfair question. Sorry. 102. Why? Because there is an even chance of being misclassified to your advantage or to your disadvantage. So this is the first step towards ensuring fairness, to say, okay, but let's just see whether the test did measure as accurately as we think it did. There are also economic gains. So usefulness may be enhanced if you provide university officials with more information, for example. I recently wrote an article in language testing with Laura Shield and Bart Davis of University of Kent. I'm co-supervising her PhD. And she presents evidence in 24 or so interviews that she had with politicians in the EU that they are using test results not for political power plays as the woke-ish establishment is accusing them of, but for civic and economic integration. That they make out a perfect case for you need language in order to participate fully in civic and in economic life. They do not want to use it simply to exclude or to gatekeep, as is the accusation. They are useful, and usefulness is an analogically economic dimension of language intervention, design, and implementation, such as efficiency and utility also are. All of these concerns that I've just talked about, fairness, usefulness, effectiveness, etc., have come to us due to the prominence that language assessment literacy, or LAL as it is abbreviated at times, has given us. So if we design with efficiency and with care and compassion, that means that we are taking into account the connection between the technical and the economic, that's the utility and efficiency one, and we are taking into account the connection between the technical and the ethical. That's where the fairness, the concern with fairness derives from. There are also others, informativity, transparency, accessibility, they're all buzzwords of our time. And it's interesting that they are, again, being focused on by language test developers. Rasha Rambarich, who completed her PhD in the Department of English that I'm speaking to at the moment in 2012, she redefined transparency not as knowledge that test developers have, but that language test takers have about the measurement. So she sets pretty high standards, or she proposes that we set pretty high standards for information about a test that is being made available to test takers. We achieve greater accessibility in that way, and we also, of course, enhance public communication about what the test measures. These are clearly, if you speak about informativity, accessibility, etc., these are clearly lingual and social dimensions of language test design. So there are ways in which the technical design function anticipates the lingual dimension of experience in being meaningful or interpretable or accessible, and technical appropriateness, that is fitting in with the social interaction. There are other ways of determining fit that I'm going to show you here by looking at a test that was also developed in the Department of English, the toets van academische geletterdheid van nagraadse studenten. So Ginny Kaiser, when she did her, no, this is not an English one, maybe in another department. Anyway, when she did her MA on developing a test of postgraduate academic literacy, we did the kinds of analyses that are called Roche analyses. Perhaps I should just stop myself for a second and just say the kinds of statistical analyses that I've shown you thus far all derive from what is known in language testing theory as classical test theory. So they give descriptive and a modicum of inferential statistics. But there is another generation of statistical analyses becoming available that's called Roche analyses. They are probability analyses, and they tell you what is the likelihood of there, in this case, being a fit between the population, that's the distribution curve that you see on the left, and the items, that's the distribution curve that you see on the right. And if you have very strict parameters for that, those -2, -1, 0, etc., are what they call logits, in other words, logistical measurements. And if you have a very strict requirement, you will say, I won't tolerate any items that lie outside of 2 or above 2, or outside of -2, or less than -2, in other words. And there are 3 items, items 1, 4, and 23, that look as if they don't fit the ability of the candidate. So we've got statistical means of determining social appropriateness, or the social appropriateness of the fit of the measurement to the population. Let me turn to the issue of justice. We seek justice in test design. That's our last question, you will remember, question number 6. All of these concerns go back to Rawls, the 1990 book, A Theory of Justice. And the upshot of all of that, I won't try to summarize the debate here for you, but the upshot of it is that we should be accountable for what we design, but that accountability rests on transparency and accessibility. So you need the lingual and the social disclosures before you can become politically or juridically accountable, or legally accountable for that matter. Now, language assessment literacy, or LAL, has resulted in language test designers shouldering the task of correction of writing wrongs. In other words, they've said, okay, if we want justice, then we must correct, because justice is about correcting things that are wrong. The challenges are that policies need to become more accountable and transparent. We haven't yet reached that, but the fact that we're focusing on it means that there is now attention to it, and that there is a potential disclosure in the weighting. So these aesthetic and juridical disclosures say that our designs must be in harmony, and we are accountable for them. Those are anticipations of the technical connections that the technical has with, respectively, the aesthetic dimension of our experience and the juridical dimension of our experience. So are we making progress? Well, we certainly have more economical language testing. Toby van Dijk, another doctoral candidate in the English department in 2010. And I've just written an article on achieving technical economy. We've written an article about a specific kind of task that we're given a language test that measures much more economically than others. I won't bore you with the technical details there. Also coming forward is the issue of multilingual tests. How do we accommodate all kinds of languages and various languages in tests? Then Iselda has in several languages all kinds of tests there. So we've got greater awareness. We've even got an organization called the Network of Expertise in Language Assessment that is dealing with this. And there's this marvelous book, 38 chapters, Toegepaste Taalkunde in Afrikaans, that has just appeared from Van Schaik, and that I think is a real boost to applied linguistics in South Africa. There are challenges. So let me close by saying what are the challenges are. For universities, Duplessis, that's not Colleen, that's Colleen's husband, has identified a lack of alignment between the real language needs of students and institutional policies. Now, you can go and read that article in a book called Assessing Academic Literacy in a Multilingual Society, Transition and Transformation. That's a book that I jointly edited with John Reed of Auckland and Theo. But go and read Theo's story there. It is fascinating. Then I think that other challenge is that we are paying the price of subservience. We at times allow unintelligible English for administration, and we don't look at the inadequate language ability for learning. We don't look at that closely enough. There's just been an audit undertaken by SADILA, the South African Digital Language Resources Centre, and I'll come to where that fits in a second, and it shows that the situation is really dire, and I don't think it will be resolved soon. The second challenge is the assessment of home languages at school. Now, we did a survey for Umalusi in 2013. Colleen Duplessis wrote a doctoral thesis on that. She refers in that thesis to 4 reports commissioned by Umalusi. They reveal the analysis that she did, the neglect of assessment guidelines in the National Senior Certificate Exam. In other words, that question that I showed you earlier, do you adhere to the subject assessment guidelines? Honest answer, no, I don't. And neither do the examiners at the end of the year. The papers present no actual cognitive challenge. That's another finding. And they're not comparable across languages. They measure in wildly different ways. It's a disgrace. The solution for Umalusi thus far has been to ignore the problem. When I inquired in 2023, have you done anything about this? It's 10 years ago that we gave you this report. We interacted with you 7 times, pleading with you to correct this wrong. And the answer from my colleague at Umalusi was, people here don't understand about language. They don't understand the problem. The problem is that at that time when we wrote this report, when Colleen and others were doing these analyses, the number of pupils affected was 500,000. Now it's 1 million. So ever more people are being affected. We've sacrificed justice and accountability and reputability in the case of the examination of home languages in grade 12, and it is scandalous. It's a scandalous combination of injustice, of carelessness, and incompetence. It's really inexcusable. There is no other way of putting this. The third challenge belongs more to us. It looks back at whether we are effectively interacting with the bureaucracy. Now, in the case of Umalusi, I can tell you now we did not interact effectively. I don't know why, but we need to find out. It's not going to be easy to take up this challenge because there are all kinds of challenges within the Department of Basic Education, even though there is now a minister that seems to be moving. There is confusion that was sown by the Department of Higher Education about Indigenous languages and their place in higher education, and the former minister's blatant misleading of Parliament on this score. That is so disgraceful. I do not want to mention his name. It is, yeah. Let me just desist. There is a low level of assessment literacy within the bureaucracy, so we must find a way of dealing with that as language test design. I'm looking forward to 2029. Then I hope that the ideological motivation for the further destruction of our education system will evaporate. If that evaporates, then sensible people and rational people may come together and rectify what is not good. I'm hoping that by 2029, the subservience of institutions of higher education, such as our universities, will be exposed. I don't need to give you examples of those, but you get that every day. I'm hoping that the disgrace will cease and that the dysfunctionality will be addressed. Really, that is a hope for all of us. I don't think it's going to be realized before 2029, but it may in 2029, in the best case scenario, it may just perhaps be possible. What are the positives? Let me end with several positives. We've done more than 150 publications and analyses just on language assessment in South Africa over the last 20 years. And we've even got international publications. That book by John Reed, Post-Admission Language Assessment of University Students, devotes a whole chapter to language assessment in South Africa. That assessing academic literacy in a multilingual society is all about South Africa, right? So all of us wrote in there. Kabelo Sebulaya wrote in there, Laura Brennan, Avasha Ramberich, Toby van Dijk, all of them. That word cloud, by the way, that you see on the right is from Toby van Dijk, from his study of what is afoot with language test design in South Africa. The second positive is that we've now, with the help of Iselda, we've instituted an MA qualification at the University of Pretoria, possibly also at Northwest University in 2026, possibly also at Academia in 2026, and possibly subsequently at the University of Stellenbosch. This is being supported by Iselda. That's the Interinstitutional Centre for Language Development and Assessment. I would so have wished that the University of the Free State would be part of that. You've chosen to go another route, I have heard. We've chosen to go the route of a taught course where a theory of applied linguistics is at the center, where you have compulsory modules, language curriculum, testing and policy design, and where you have electives and where you have a mini dissertation. And we're going to make that a taught course too, because we think that numbers are important at the moment. South Africa has enough language problems that we need applied linguists to contribute to solve. I think this is more or less what I have to say. I'm just going to give you a last shot of what I think responsible design involves. It involves giving shape to things like technical unity, technical adequacy, theoretical defensibility, utility, etc. I've discussed only the last few with you because I think that they constitute disclosures of the way that we look at language assessment design. There are a PhD and an MA in waiting. I have the proposal. Anybody is free to approach me and you can have the proposal for free. You just need to enter the name of your supervisor and your own name on this document that I will give you for free. Possible topic is assessment and policy literacy, South African responses to global and national assessment challenges. It's there, it's waiting for somebody to do. And you're more than welcome to get in touch with me to hear whether I'll be able to share it with you, but I will be. I'm willing to share it with anybody. Okay, those are my addresses, but you have them anyway. So I'm going to stop sharing now and go back to where we are. Change video devices. Okay, no, that's fine. Can everybody see me? No, they can't.
Thank you so much, Albert.
Okay, you can't see me at the moment. Okay, camera.
That's okay. This is absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. Just 2 comments before I open up the floor for the Q&A. First of all, I think it's so important to speak about the importance of applied linguists, especially at a time globally where humanities faculties are under attack. It seems to me that it's a bloodbath in the UK. North America's doing badly, and there's little ripplings here in South Africa at our universities. What is the future of humanities and social sciences faculties? Yeah. So it's great. We need to keep talking about this. And by the way, I love the idea of a taught course. I just think it guides students, especially because they come from fairly weak backgrounds, school-wise, reading, writing, research, you name it. So I think, giving them a proper quality course where you can steer them in the right direction is really, really key. Albert, if you don't mind, if I can start with a question here. You speak about things like social justice, and what's fascinating to me is how some universities overseas are now declaring that use of proper English grammar is indicative of racial bias, and that we need to move completely over to critical grammar. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's happening in that arena.
I think I'm tolerant of a range of accents and a range of dialects, and I think that the World Englishes movement is a good thing, and I think that the work that they've done in sensitizing us to different dialects and different kinds of English is important. However, if I'm a businessman and I want to set up a call center, I'm going to select very carefully where I am setting up that call center. And South Africa is the fortunate point where I would set it up, because the English that we speak, not in all instances, but the English that we speak generally is intelligible to other people all over. So mutual intelligibility, I think, is indicated. There are also cases in our own university where I simply do not understand the English that is used by an administrator. I find it difficult, and it's not because I'm a stickler for correctness or for hypercorrect grammar, etc. So, yeah, I think it's a difficult question, Susan. But I do think that part of the problem will disappear if we give credit to multilingualism, and that's this MA in Applied Linguistics that I've been talking about at the University of Pretoria. We specifically decided to focus on multilingualism, yes, and not on English. So, so we took the politically more correct route there, but I also think that it may stand us in good stead to give other languages their due.
Yes,
And
yes.
that is what justice is about for me.
Right.
Justice is about correcting wrongs. They may be past wrongs, they may be present wrongs, but you could also say they may be future wrongs. So how do we get things to blossom, to be disclosed in the future? You make opportunities available. And the kinds of things that Iselda, for example, it's really a pity that the University of the Free State has fallen out of that. It was against the advice of your former dean, incidentally. She struggled with the vice rector who wanted to let go of Iselda, and she argued with her, but not hard enough. But anyway, so we need to focus on multilingualism, and we do need to give languages their due. Justice for languages comes when languages come into their own, have their rightful place. And I don't think all of our languages have their rightful place. And the rightful place of other languages, like Afrikaans, for example, is being threatened. Now, you can't preach multilingualism as a government on the one hand, and then target Afrikaans on the other. So there's this kind of discrepancy and contradiction that I think is not, we're not doing well there.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I don't have a clear answer about that, but I think toleration of differences, especially where these differences have been described and systematized, like South African Black English, for example. There is a system there.
Absolutely.
There's nothing that worries me about intelligibility when somebody says, I can be able to.
Yeah, exactly.
See, it's intelligible. And it's not that far away from a kind of the mainstream norm.
Thank you, Albert. Tinus, I see your hand is up. Please ask your question.
Okay, well, thank you very much again for a wonderful presentation. I enjoyed hearing the story about the gorillas again, because my immediate reaction was, I know that story, bouncing up and down on my seat. So one remark and then maybe two questions. One was, many years ago, you told me that one of the things we must be careful about as instructors is to fall prey to the assumption that students get worse in their language use when, in fact, we are the ones who get better, and we run the risk of becoming increasingly intolerant of the fact that they are for year, not radically worse, they're just at the same level, but we are the ones who get better. Yeah. I feel that. I feel it. But I've got two questions really. One is that there is a lot of talk about what critical thinking should look like at a university now, and that question can be answered through the optics of decolonization or a variety of other theoretical perspectives. But one of the common threads has been that instead of us as instructors going into a classroom and presenting ourselves as experts and telling students, these are the social injustices for which we must seek solutions, what we ought to be doing is involving students to the degree that they can articulate to us what the social wrongs are as they experience them, so that students can enter into a discussion with each other and create knowledge with us before we even talk about what solutions might be. Now, from that perspective, the capacity to articulate yourself in an intelligible manner is then fundamental to social justice, which would mean that applied linguistics is not something it's not ancillary. It's not something that we can't run the risk of allowing applied linguistics to play a supportive role. It must stand central because it is pivotal to students' capacity to articulate themselves. But it does not seem to me that message is very, at least not at the University of the Free State, very central. People talk about social justice, they talk about decolonization, but they do not talk enough about what is being done before the university and during a student's university experience about mobilizing or sharpening a student's capacity to articulate themselves. And I find it fascinating that it isn't happening. That's my one question. Like, what is your read on that? My second question is about the equity and justice between languages, because I serve on the committee for the Scientific Committee for Languages, and on a regular basis, I see master's and PhD proposals from departments for African studies, for example, in which the level of language is deeply problematic, but students seem uninterested in writing dissertations in indigenous languages. Maybe that's just the UFS. If it's not, I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll come to the indigenous languages last, and their use in especially postgraduate analyses. Let me start where you started with the is the language getting worse? Are we getting better? Yeah, we are getting better. There's no doubt about it. I often look back at some of my second year assignments, and it is a humbling experience. I have certainly progressed from 1968, when I was a raw second year at the University of the Free State, to the way that I write today. I write much more fluently, and I am getting better. I know that. Then, are the students getting worse? I always refer to that study. There's an Afrikaans journal called the Huisgenoot, and that particular magazine was was studied, or a particular debate was studied in that magazine by an MA student, I think at Northwest University or somewhere. And she indicated that it was almost monotonous regularity. Every 10 years or so, there was a debate about the deterioration of Afrikaans. Now, you can understand that from the point of view of Afrikaans always being threatened, because it's so close to English that English influences needed to be shielded from its cousin. But that kind of debate occurs in other languages too. So the proximity of Afrikaans and English doesn't quite explain that fully. But with regularity, people start complaining about language and language standards, etc. I don't think there's much we can do about that, but it's a nice kind of debate to debunk every now and then. Then about whether decolonialization is the kind of optics, as you say, the approach to do it, and the relationship between experts and students. There are always degrees. I think there are certain things that expectably students do not have enough experience in being able to set their own curricula. I really think that students don't have the accumulated knowledge that the experts, that is the academics who are teaching them in this respect, have. I do think, however, that if you've spent a lifetime in teaching, as I have done, I mean, I've got over 50 years of teaching behind me now, and I have learned humility in the sense that I have learned a lot from my students. I have learned more, however, from my postgraduate students than from my undergraduate students. So there are degrees, and one does need to nuance this a little bit. But what I'm saying is that, yes, that is a humbling experience, and one needs to approach it with a good degree of humility. How much can you actually learn from your students? But you also need to say to yourself, to make learning possible, I as the teacher must make opportunities available for people to flourish, to grow, and to develop. So whenever I've put together, say, a language course, I've put that together on the premise that this must be an opportunity, or what do they call it nowadays, an affordance, post Derrida and Foucault. It must be an opportunity that you have created, because you have the authority as the teacher, for the learner to develop. That authority relationship won't go away, but there are ethical ways and there are ways of handling it that are not threatening. Then finally, let me just say something about the use of indigenous languages. They do flourish when people put their minds to it and they make the effort. So My wife is the journal manager for a scholarly journal called the South African Association for Language Teaching Journal for Language Teaching. So she manages it. They've just put to bed an edition with, I think, something like 12 or 14 articles that were written about language teaching in Indigenous and also other languages in Africa. All of them Indigenous languages, and all of the 14 articles were written in those languages with English summaries. I find that really heartening. So that I couldn't understand much more than the abstracts, but that's my loss, that I couldn't read this in the original because I don't know the original languages. But there are ways that people are doing this. If you look at the experiments that Johannes Matlasela and others have done at the Vaal Triangle campus at Northwest University, for example, they've done wonderful experiments with language tests that they've translated into Sesotho, and they're now translating into Xhosa. In fact, there are more than 12 tests of academic literacy in other Indigenous languages. So if you make the opportunities available, I think those languages will come into their own. But you do need to make the opportunities available. Do I answer your question, please?
Perfectly, thank you very much.
Left out?
No, that's answered my questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, I see we have run out of time. We started a bit late, but we have run out of time. I can't, if you want to ask one more question, you're welcome. But Albert, maybe we should close now. I see that I've got to now rush off to a conference. Let me put my camera on at least, sorry. This was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I think we need to invite you back if you would be amenable and if you've got time. And perhaps even, we could even perhaps convince you, persuade you to give a guest lecture to our honour students. I think it'll be good to get them at that level before they continue with their masters and with their doctorates. So Albert, once again, thank you so much. I've made so many notes here. I think I ran out of ink with my one pen. It's food for thought, and it's always, to me, quite rare to have the opportunity to listen to a presentation where you've got a scholar who can give you this incredibly extensive overview, you know, and we can try to then take a look at what the pitfalls are, what to avoid, and if we did go wrong, how did we go wrong, and how can we then fix it? And so that overview for me is like a diamond. So thank you very much for that.
Okay, it was my pleasure. If there are questions that remain, I can stay on for a little bit, or you can email me. Anta has my details. Thanks, Anta. Anta has my details. You all have my details. So yeah, please do touch base with me if you wanted to ask a question but didn't have the opportunity to do so this morning.
Thanks, Albert. Perhaps the one thing I did want to ask you about, but that's a talk on its own, would be what you think about language assessment practices and this ever encroaching artificial intelligence.
Yes.
But yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. We are using but the subscribed version of ChatGPT to help us generate items at the moment. But they still, even with the subscribed version, they still need curating. So yes, it's artificial intelligence is helping us a lot, but the task that Marlene Roeder is working on is building a computer adaptive language testing platform for us. So we should be able to test in much more economical ways somewhere in the future. In other words, where you would have, for example, in a vocabulary test, you would need, say, something like 40 items. You could now potentially, between 7 and 11 items, you could determine, say, okay, this is the level. You're a 67% vocabulary knowledge. That's it. You won't get any further than this.
Yeah. Oh no, thank you so much, Albert. This was fantastic. We hope to see you again.
You will. Thanks very much. I'm passing through Bloemfontein on the 12th, and apart from...
Oh, you said so. Yes.
Apart from the squash squash commitments that I have with my old friends at State Squash Club, I may also be able to touch base with you if you need me.
Oh, that's great. Okay,
Yeah.
Thanks, Albert. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance. Thank
Thank you.
you. Go well, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.